Hey everybody, so I wanted to share with you what I'm using for injectors on my car. Right here is the stock 1UZ injector. This should be about 250 cc's. This one right here is a factory Chevy LS injector. It's a flex fuel injector out of a truck. You can find these in junkyards relatively easily, very cheap. You can also order these online if you'd like, but they're going to be a little more expensive. These have a part number ending in 903. These are the flex fuel injectors, so you can run an 85. These will have about 350 cc, and then we're going to step up to this, which is the modified. These are decaps. It's the same exact injector right here. This one's been decapped, so it's going to flow about 800 cc's. There's plenty of guys in the LS community that go over decapping these, but in short, what we're doing is we're getting rid of that. That little orange piece is just to hold on this O-ring, and if we look right here, it's kind of hard to see, the camera won't focus, but there's 4 little holes, and that's just a cap that's welded over top of this injector, and decapping is just removing that. So on this one, you can see I just kind of cut the corner off and then peeled the top off, and there's just one big hole on the top, and that's where all our flow comes from. You can buy these flow matched online for a couple $100. There's a bunch of guys that do this. You'll just have to do your own research and go with someone that you think you can trust. There are fake LS injectors that you can buy on eBay. I would not recommend those. We had a buddy have some in his, and they were flowing all over the place. None of them were flow matched. They were just garbage. But these, the one thing is, if you're doing it yourself, if you're decapping them yourself, you're gonna need a flow bench. We have a cheap $300 one, I believe it was. You just basically need to make sure they're all putting out the same amount of fuel within a given time. There are people that will, they sell them already flow matched. Some of them will want you to send in your set of injectors. If you do that, go ahead and get you 2 sets from the junkyard that have matching part numbers, because a lot of times there will be a dud. So they'll flow close to the 350 cc, but whenever you decap them, you might have one that will stay down at 350 cc while the rest are running 800. That's, of course not good whenever you're shoving boost down it. Super easy. There's a lot of videos about how to decap these and how to flow match them. There's a couple companies that sell these just like this. They're flow matched. They come to you, you just throw them in, a couple $100, and you get 800 cc injectors. So there's a difference here between these 2 injectors that should be pretty obvious, and that would be the top O-ring is significantly bigger on the LS. On the 1UZ, it runs a 12mm O-ring, and the LS runs a 14mm O-ring. The bottoms are relatively the same. There's not really anything that needs to be done there. On the top, the first way that I've ran this, I used this little guy here, which is an O-ring adapter. It's a 12mm on the top, and it's a female for a 14mm O-ring on the bottom. So that will just go right on top, like that. And then the nice thing about doing it this way is there's no real modification needed to make these work. You're just throwing on these. You can buy these like a set of 8 for about 50 bucks on eBay, which is what I did. The only issue I have with this is this top O-ring is really thin, and it's a possible failure point. I mean, you're just adding another O-ring. That's another O-ring that can give out, and you know, I don't, the way I've been on my car, I don't want to take the chance of getting a leak. Usually whenever O-rings they go bad is because you installed it without lubing it up really well, and you nick the O-ring a little bit putting it in. So if you check it and you do your diligence whenever you first put them in, you should be fine. I hadn't had any issue, but the first time I had put these in, I had nicked the O-ring and it had a little bit of a leak. So how these work whenever I put them in, it uses the stock, completely unmodified fuel rail spacer. So you ain't got to do nothing crazy to that. And then we got the top hat right here, that adapter. And then in the bottom, I used another set of these blue O-rings for these. And I think you can get a full set of 8 for like 15 bucks online. They do come with these green ones, and I have used the green ones. But we're going to put that O-ring right in there. And that's going to replace the lower O-ring seal for the 1UZ. If you try to use that, it's gonna end up being too tall, and you're gonna have to space your fuel rail spacers up to compensate. But we can use that, and that works just fine. The reason I like the blue ones is they are thicker and a little bit more squishy, so you get a little bit more crush on them. As you can see, that's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker. That's the first way. That's probably going to be the easiest way for a lot of guys to run these injectors. The next way, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's still really... The next way gets a little bit complicated, but it's still very accessible. So to start, we're going to take these adapters. Well, these are 3D printed ones. I have the stock one right here. That's one of them. This is off of another intake actually. But we're gonna cut these. And the reason we're gonna cut these is the injector itself is actually shorter altogether. So we're losing a good bit of length there. Let me grab the right one. That's the right one right there. So what we did here is we took the stock spacer and we cut it at sort of an angle. We'll cut it at a little bit of an angle. It's got a 1mm rake across the board. Not a whole lot. Set this down for a second. Okay, so the next way I want to show you how to use these injectors and not use that adapter. It's going to require modifying these spacers. So here's one that's already modified. There's a little ridge in there, and that's going to locate your fuel rail, so you don't want to get rid of that, but you're going to cut one end off, and it's going to have a slant to it, if you can see that. It's a very shallow slant. I'll show you how to make a template for that. So these are, this piece here, the factory one, is 18mm in diameter. The circumference of that is going to be 56.5mm. So I'll get you a set of calipers. I'm going to run that out. You can go a little over, it's not super critical. All right, and we're gonna take a piece of copy paper here. We're gonna line that up on one edge. All right. You have to bear with me, I'm doing this one-handed. Try and keep this as square as possible. Just like that, and we're just gonna run a line. Alright. So, now this little area is gonna be, make that line straight, we're gonna make that a little working area. So our tall side is 16 millimeters. Again, we're just gonna run that down to 16. Right there. Alright, and we're just gonna put a mark there. And then we're gonna put another mark on this side. Right about there. Alright. The short side is going to be 15 millimeters. So we're just dropping down 1 millimeter. Alright, let's see. 56 divided by 2. That's going to be 27.25. 0.25. So that's what we need to do first, because we need our center line. 25.3 is probably close enough. So there's our center line right there. Alright, we're just gonna make a line up. Alright, now on that center line, that's where we're gonna put our 15 millimeter mark at. Right there. Alright, and then just use a straight edge. I'm just gonna freehand it here because it doesn't matter all that much right now. Well, whenever you do yours, just use the straight edge of your calipers. So I'm just gonna cut this out real quick. And you end up with something like this. And then what you can do with this, set you down right here real quick. What you can do with this is you'll just take it, and whenever you're doing it, it doesn't really matter all that much where you put it. But we're just gonna wrap it around, and that's gonna create your template. Mark it, cut it with a hacksaw. If you're putting these in a vise, be careful. This plastic is brittle. Even when it's good, it's still brittle. You don't want to clamp it too tight. I found using like an angle grinder and a sander gets the best result, but do that how you will. That's the first little obstacle tackled. So this is what I'm using right here. As you can see, these injectors are straight into the rail, getting rid of that adapter. So what we have to do here is, if I can get one of these out, is we're actually going to bore those out. And the way that I've done that is I bought a set of these countersink bits. Get the ones I used. Got some of these countersink bits and a straight flute. Reamer. And these right here, they come in a pack of 6. These were $12 on Amazon. This is a 17 32nd straight flute reamer. This was 15 bucks on Amazon. Make sure you get 1/2 inch shank for your drill. I use just a regular handheld drill to do this. I start off with this the biggest one, the biggest countersink that this kit came with, and I just go ahead and start, and I countersink it to start with, to make the start a little bit easier to get straight. Then I use just a regular 1/2 inch drill bit to just get rid of most of the material. You can't use a regular drill bit. The surface finish just isn't ideal. You can try and run it if you'd like, but that's at your own risk. I didn't like the surface finish. It was way too rough for my liking. This reamer gives a pretty smooth finish, and I believe that converted the 17/32 ends up being something like a 13.7 millimeter hole. And we're gonna go, once you countersink and drill out with the 1/2 inch drill bit, you're gonna just take some tape and you're gonna mark that at about 8 millimeters. That's gonna be your depth. You just put the tape on and then run it down and stop once you get deep enough. I use this smaller one. This is a 12.4 millimeter countersink, and I use that to actually go down inside, because on the top of these, that little plastic ring that runs around is bigger than the well, I don't know if it's bigger, but it's it'll get in the way. It'll start hitting that first, and I would rather have it pushing down on the O-ring itself rather than pushing down on the plastic on the top of the injector. Once we get that done, you're going to run into a problem with your studs. The way I did it is, it seems that these casting marks are a good reference point. So all I did is, let me run this out. So all I did was run this out, and I'm using that casting line as a reference for the depth, and I'm just going to about the center of the top of the stud, which is about 59 millimeters. So what I did is I actually bent that stud an extra 2 millimeters out, which should be about 61, 62. Same reference. You can do this all the way around. It should be 2 millimeters all the way around. And that's at 62 millimeters. So you're just moving it 2 millimeters straight that way. And the way I did that is I got a 3/8 socket, whatever fits, and I stick it down here with an extension on it, and I just kind of pulled it and eyeballed it until I got it right. The reason I use the socket is so that the bend actually happens down here as opposed to somewhere up here, because we need the spacer to go on, and that is what ends us up with this spacer, and why it has to be slanted so it sits down there, and then we end up getting a nice purchase, and we can actually use that spacer and that whole setup. The short side of the spacer is going to be towards the outside. Get this manifold out of the way. So the short side is going to be towards the outside. Let me pop these injectors back in here. And the way that I'm using this is the lower seals, which I might end up changing this because this isn't actually the final version. This is just kind of a middle grounds. Makes it where you can run a good injector for cheap, and it's not going to have adapters. You're not going to have extra failure points or anything like that, but you could do what I did on the other side using the factory LS O-ring as the lower, because you can get these, but the only way I found to get the factory UZ lower seal was to get the whole kit, which isn't too bad. I think I spent 30 bucks to get all 8 of them, but if you can get away with just getting one set of seals, obviously that's going to be ideal. So I might end up changing that, but as of right now, And if you do that, you're going to have to shorten this spacer to drop it down further. We'll get this on there and let you see it. But, and there's plenty of thread left, so you can get your nut all the way down. You ain't gonna worry about running out of thread or nothing like that. Figure out a socket. Tighten these up. Alright, and as you can see, that ends up. Now the reason we had to bend that stud is the way that all this is set up. As you go lower, it actually pulls the rail in because of the angle of that stud. That's why we had to change that angle. As you can see, you got a nice little bit of free spin. Nothing too concerning. It should work just fine. It sits into that lower seal really well. It's got a good bit of crush on it, so it's not just loose. And that's I mean, you'll be $30 into it, and it's gonna fit in there like it's a factory injector, and it's gonna work. The way that I'm actually gonna end up doing it is I'm gonna be getting rid of this stud altogether. I'm gonna clean all this up, and I got some 3/4 inch aluminum rod, and I'm actually gonna TIG weld that to the manifold, and I'm gonna drill it and tap it and put a shorter stud in it. That way I don't have to worry about breaking a spacer or anything like that. It'll just pop on and off, which the spacers aren't a big deal. I mean, they really don't just come flying off whenever you take the rail off, but if you happen to take the manifold off or something like that and you tip it over, it might, you know, come off the stud. But that's all up to you. I haven't, whenever I do the this piece made out of aluminum, I need to take that rod to the machine shop and have them machine that interface for the rail. Right here, that hole has slop in it, but on the spacer it has that lip to take up that slop. Now there's not a lot of slop with the stock one. There's not a lot of left to right slop between the stud and the inside diameter, so you're going to put that at the top, and then your slant cut is going to go on the bottom. Overall, I think it's a pretty easy process, and you can run it any way you want. This is just to give you some options on how you want to do it. Like I said, in their stock form, they're 350 cc's. You can run E85 through them. Decapped, they're 800 cc, and they're also E85. There are ones that are not E85. I've heard that you can run E85 through them, but I don't know anything really about that. But there is plenty of information about the LS decap injectors. Just do some Google searches. Sloppy Mechanics forum has a lot of information about these. They've had a lot of good luck with them. They don't really have a lot of them go bad. I mean, they're factory injectors at the end of the day, so the actual workings of them are pretty solid. Whereas you get some unknown stuff on eBay, there's really no telling the quality that you're going to get. There is one thing you will need a aftermarket ECU, or at least it's highly recommended. I know some of you guys run a stock ECU on low boost, like 7 psi, and you swap out your injectors, so the stock form might actually work pretty good for you. I don't know. I'm running a standalone on mine. It's running 15 psi all stock internals, and I know that works. We're at 50% duty cycle with these injectors, so there's still plenty of fuel to be had, and we will be turning it up hopefully here shortly. Hopefully this was comprehensive and easy to understand. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask or message me, and I'll try to help you out the best that I can. Hopefully this helps a few of you out and it cuts down the cost. I think you can get these, like a full set of 8 already decapped, online for around $300, you know, so for that amount of fuel injector at that cheap of a price, to me it's well worth it, but that's a decision for you to make. Again, any questions or comments, just ask me and I'll do the best I can to answer them.